Hi, in this lecture we will discuss the properties of blood. And last time I told you that both oxygen and carbon dioxide are carried through the body with the blood. But this is not the only function of the blood. It also picks up nutrients in the intestine and then distributes them to the cells of the body. It helps to eliminate the waste. It is involved in the regulation of the acidity and chemical composition of body fluids, fluid volume, body temperature, some other processes. Cells of blood have the immune functions, so they fight the pathogens and various infections. And also, if the blood vessels gets damaged, then blood cells can help to repair them. Blood is sticky, it's opaque, it has slightly salty taste. If you ever lick your blood, you know it. And a little bit of metallic taste because of the iron in the red blood cells. The color is red, but it can be bright, like almost scarlet red, when the blood cells carry oxygen. The color becomes a little bit purplish in the oxygen-poor blood. The temperature is 38 degrees or 104 degrees, 0.4 degrees Fahrenheit. It's very viscous compared to water. It's 5 times more viscous than water and slightly alkaline. Typically, males have 5 to 6 liters of blood. That's about 1.3 gallons. And in females, the volume of blood is a little bit less. It's about 4 to 5 liters, simply because women are generally smaller than men. So it's about 1 to 1.3 gallons. Blood is considered to be a tissue, but a very unique tissue, the fluid one. That's the only one in the body that's a fluid tissue. It is composed of plasma, the liquid part, and cells and cell fragments, the so-called formed elements of the blood. The proportion is approximately 55% of the volume is taken by the plasma and 45% is taken by the cells. How do we know it? If you take a blood and spin it, whole blood, and spin it in the centrifuge, the cells, they're a little bit heavier, so they will precipitate to the bottom, and you will see that a lot of red blood cells, a little bit of white blood cells and platelets here, but altogether that will be 45%, and the rest of it will be transparent yellowish fluid, and this is plasma. Plasma contains water, 92%, and there are also many plasma proteins, such as albumins. There are various antibodies that provide the defense against the infections. There are proteins that carry lipids throughout the body, as well as proteins that are involved in the blood clotting. Other components of the plasma are various nutrients, electrolytes, hormones, vitamin, as well as waste. There are 3 types of blood cells. The most abundant are red blood cells, or sometimes they're called erythrocytes, which also means red cells. And here you see them, these roundish structures in the blood smear. These are erythrocytes. There are also white blood cells, or leukocytes, these bigger cells with well-stained nuclei, and platelets, or thrombocytes, these little guys, very small, between the cells. Even if they look differently, all blood cells come from the stem cells that located in the red bone marrow. A little bit more about red blood cells. Again, they're called erythrocytes, erythro-red site cell. They are small, relatively small, and they're extremely specialized. They have one and only function. They carry the gases. So they carry 98% of oxygen and 24% of carbon dioxide in the blood. And as I said, they're very abundant, like pretty much 99.9% of cells in the blood. These are red blood cells. Oh, they have an interesting shape. They look a little bit like a bagel, only without the hole in the middle, but it makes sense because that creates a lot of surface for the gas exchange. Sometimes they can travel in stacks, but generally this shape also provides that they can squeeze into the capillaries pretty easy. Capillaries are very narrow, and maybe cells of the other shape would just get stuck there. So because their only function is to carry gases, they lack a lot of elements that other normal cells would have. So they don't have the nuclei, they don't have the ribosomes, they don't have mitochondria, which means they can't divide, they can't synthesize proteins, and they can't repair damage or produce energy. So because they kind of concentrate on the only thing they're doing. And for this, instead of all the cell elements, they are packed with hemoglobin. I already talked about hemoglobin in the previous lecture about the respiratory system, but I will say it again. So it's a large molecule. It consists of 4 protein chains. Each chain contains a specific chemical element called heme that binds iron. And because of its chemical nature, the heme with the iron can bind oxygen. So each molecule of hemoglobin has 4 hemes, so it can bind 4 molecules of oxygen. And the number of these molecules is extremely high, so each individual red blood cell contains about 300 million hemoglobin molecules, so multiply this by 4, and that means that each cell carries up to 1.2 billion of oxygen molecules. In the lungs, where oxygen is diffuses into the blood from the air, hemoglobin picks up these oxygen molecules, now it's called oxyhemoglobin, and then as a component of the red blood cells with the blood, it is distributed throughout the body to various body tissues. In the tissues where the concentration of oxygen is low, hemoglobin loses it, so now this oxygen can be used by the cells. Also in the tissue, it picks up some of the carbon dioxide, like about 25%. The rest travels with the plasma. And then in the content of plasma and hemoglobin, CO2, carbon dioxide, travels to the lungs and will be exhaled. As I said, all blood cells are produced in the red bone marrow in a large amounts, so each second about 2 million red blood cells are produced in the human body. They don't live for a very long time, they live about 3 to 4 months, and then they became old, rigid, fragile, and start to degenerate. So these erythrocytes are engulfed by the white blood cells, and the iron is recycled for the synthesis of new hemoglobin molecules. The number of red blood cells in the body is tightly regulated, because that's another case of the Goldilocks, when it shouldn't be too much or too little, because if the number of red blood cells is insufficient, then the person experiences something that's called hypoxia, hyper low oxygen. The cells do not have enough oxygen because red blood cells can't carry it to the tissues, and that means they cannot produce energy. At the same time, you would think, like, let's have a lot of red blood cells because that will supply all our body with the necessary oxygen, but that's not a good situation as well, because when the excess of red blood cells in the blood makes it very viscous and makes it prone to clotting. And if the clots are formed, they would block the blood vessels, and these can cause the stroke if it happens in the brain, or if it happens in the heart, that will lead to the heart failure. The content of red blood cells is regulated by a hormone. It's an interesting hormone. It's called erythropoietin. It is produced in a very unusual place in kidneys, and it stimulates the production of red blood cells in the red bone marrow. So let's say we don't have enough red blood cells, and this decreases the oxygen delivery to the tissues. This stimulates kidneys to produce erythropoietin. The red bone marrow inside the bones now produces more cells, more red blood cells have more hemoglobin, more oxygen is picked up in the lungs and delivered to the tissues, and when the situation comes back to normal, the synthesis of EPO, erythropoietin, in the kidney stops. So negative feedback loop. EPO, or rather I would say people who used EPO as a doping drug, caused like a real scandal in the early 2000s. And this is a story of Lance Armstrong. He was a cyclist. He was the leader of the US cycling team. And I guess he was an outstanding athlete, and he won multiple medals and various competitions and championships. And he was the darling of America. Everyone loved him. Everyone admired him. He actually got, testicular cancer, and he beat the cancer, came back to sports, and started to win again. So a perfect human being. And then suddenly it turned out that he and his team were doping themselves with the erythropoietin. So the idea behind it is that if you increase the concentration of red blood cells in your blood, they will carry more oxygen to the muscles, and the muscles will work more efficiently. So when this became known, he fell out of grace completely, and EPO has been banned as a doping drug. So now all the athletes are tested if they have this hormone in their blood. Okay, let's make a break, and I'll come back with the description of the white blood cells.